Some food plants look exactly like what you would expect to find in a vegetable garden: tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, and so on. But others are completely different. They have bright flowers, silver or bronze foliage, or such an attractive shape that you could place them in an ornamental garden and most people would never guess you were growing them for food. That can be especially useful if you want your yard to look more like a landscape than a traditional vegetable garden. Some of the plants in this video can climb over a decorative trellis, grow in a front yard planting bed, or become a real landscape shrub while still producing fruit, roots, leaves, flowers, or stems you can harvest. Here are 10 edible plants that can do exactly that. With some of them, the edible part is obvious. With others, it's important to know exactly which part of the plant is used and how it should be prepared. Because an edible plant does not automatically mean every part of that plant should be eaten. Number 10. Bronze fennel. From a distance, bronze fennel looks more like an ornamental foliage plant than an herb. Its leaves are extremely fine and feathery, with shades of bronze, purple-brown, and green depending on the light. As the plant matures, small yellow flower clusters rise above the foliage and can look surprisingly attractive at the back of a flower border. Unlike Florence fennel, which is usually grown for its large, white, swollen base, bronze fennel is mainly useful for its foliage and seeds. The leaves have that familiar fennel flavor and can be used with fish, salads, sauces, and other dishes. Once the plant flowers and sets seed, those seeds can also be harvested and used as a spice. If you're growing it partly for appearance, place it behind shorter plants because mature bronze fennel can become fairly tall. It prefers plenty of sun and well-drained soil, and once established, it generally doesn't require the kind of constant attention that many fruiting vegetables do. One practical thing to remember: don't buy bronze fennel expecting to harvest the large white bulb you see on Florence fennel. That's not what this plant is best at. With bronze fennel, the value is in the attractive foliage, the aroma, and the seeds. Number 9. Cardoon. Cardoon can easily be mistaken for a giant ornamental thistle. It forms a large clump of long, deeply divided leaves in shades of gray-green or silver. If you allow it to flower, it produces large purple flower heads that look very similar to an artichoke or a decorative thistle. But the part most commonly eaten isn't the flower. It's the thick leaf stalks. Cardoon stalks usually need some preparation before cooking to reduce their bitterness. In some traditional growing methods, the stalks are even covered for a period before harvest so they become paler and more tender. After that, they can be cooked, braised, baked, or prepared in several different ways. This is not a plant for a tiny corner of the yard. A mature cardoon can become very large, so if you grow one, think of it more like a dramatic architectural landscape plant that happens to produce food rather than a small vegetable you squeeze between other crops. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil. The silver-gray foliage is especially striking next to dark green leaves or brightly colored flowers. And when you're looking for plants or footage, make sure you're actually looking at Cinera cardunculus, not just any wild thistle. Number 8. Jerusalem artichoke, or sunchoke. If you only looked at the part above ground, you probably wouldn't guess that this plant is grown for its tubers. Jerusalem artichoke is related to the sunflower. It grows tall stems topped with small, yellow, sunflower-like blooms. When planted in a group, it can create an attractive screen at the back of a garden or along a boundary. But the harvest is underground. Late in the season, the plant develops knobby tubers that can be dug up and used as food. They can be roasted, sautéed, added to soups, or cooked in many of the same ways you would use other root vegetables. The plant is fairly easy to grow once established, but that same toughness creates its biggest drawback. If even a few tubers are left behind in the soil, they can grow again the following year. A small patch can gradually spread into a much larger colony if you don't keep it under control. For that reason, I wouldn't put Jerusalem artichokes in the middle of a vegetable bed that you plan to dig up and rearrange every year. A dedicated area, a contained section, or a spot where you're comfortable letting the plants return each season makes much more sense. They're tall, attractive, and covered in yellow flowers. But decide where you want them before they become a permanent part of the yard. Number 7. Serviceberry. Serviceberry is a perfect example of an edible plant that can sit in a front yard landscape without looking anything like a vegetable crop. Depending on the species or variety, it may grow as a large shrub or a small tree. In early spring, it produces clusters of white flowers, often before or just as the new leaves appear. Later, small fruits ripen from red to deep purple. And in fall, many serviceberries develop yellow, orange, or red foliage. The ripe fruit is edible and is often described as having a berry-like flavor, sometimes with a slight almond note from the seeds. You can eat the fruit fresh when fully ripe or use it in jams, pies, and other recipes. If you want serviceberry mainly for fruit production, don't choose a plant only because it looks good in the landscape. Look for a variety known for good fruit quality and make sure it is suited to your climate. There is another issue to plan for. Birds love serviceberries too. If you want to harvest a significant amount, you may need to pick promptly as the fruit ripens or protect the crop when necessary. Serviceberry is especially useful in cooler and temperate climates where it performs well. It can give you spring flowers, edible summer fruit, and fall color from the same plant. Number 6. Pomegranate. A pomegranate can absolutely be grown as a fruit plant, but if you saw it while it was flowering and before the fruit appeared, you might easily think it was there only for decoration. The flowers are usually a vivid orange-red and stand out strongly against the green foliage. Depending on how it's trained and pruned, the plant can be kept as a large shrub or a small tree. And once the fruit develops, the pomegranates themselves become another attractive part of the landscape. Pomegranates are best suited to climates with hot, relatively dry summers. Once established, the plant can handle some drought, but good fruit production still depends on reasonable moisture, especially while the fruit is developing. One important thing to remember is that not every ornamental pomegranate is selected for high-quality fruit. Some varieties are grown mainly for flowers or compact size. If your goal is to have both an attractive plant and good fruit, choose a fruiting variety that matches your local climate. Pomegranates also need plenty of sun for strong flowering and fruit production. In too much shade, the plant may survive, but the harvest is likely to disappoint. In the right climate, pomegranate is one of the easiest ways to add a true fruiting plant to the landscape without making the yard look like a traditional orchard. Number 5. Maypop passionflower. The flower of maypop passionflower is probably one of the strangest and most beautiful flowers in this entire list. Its purple and white petals and intricate structures in the center make it look almost tropical, even though this particular species is native to parts of the United States. The vine can climb a trellis, fence, or decorative structure and create a dense wall of foliage during the growing season. After the flowers come the fruit. When the fruit develops fully and ripens, the pulp and seeds inside can be eaten. But this is one plant where correct identification really matters. Passionflower refers to a very large group of plants. You shouldn't see any random passionflower and assume the fruit will have the same quality or the same use. The plant we're talking about here is specifically Passiflora incarnata, commonly known as maypop in the United States. Maypop is perennial in many regions and can return from its root system. It can also send up new shoots some distance from the original plant, so place it somewhere you can manage its spread. If you want a vine with highly ornamental flowers that can also give you edible fruit, maypop is one of the most interesting options you can grow. Number 4. Globe artichoke. Globe artichoke looks very different from most vegetables in the garden. A mature plant forms a large clump of long, deeply divided leaves that are often gray-green or silver. The foliage alone is dramatic enough for the plant to be used as a landscape feature. Then it sends up tall stems topped with large flower buds. Those buds are the part we harvest and eat before they open. If you leave one of them on the plant instead of harvesting it, the bud eventually opens into a large purple flower that looks very much like an oversized ornamental thistle. So this is an unusual case where the part we eat is essentially a flower before it fully blooms. Artichokes need room. A mature plant can spread quite wide, so don't squeeze one into a tiny bed and expect everything around it to receive plenty of light. Put it somewhere where its large size becomes a landscape advantage instead of a problem. Whether it survives winter depends heavily on the variety and climate. In warmer areas, globe artichokes can be grown as perennials. In colder regions, they may need to be managed differently. If you have space for one large statement plant, globe artichoke gives you both a dramatic appearance and a harvest that looks nothing like a typical garden vegetable. Number 3. Pineapple guava, or feijoa. If you want a plant that truly looks like an ornamental shrub while still producing food, pineapple guava is one of the strongest choices on this list. The plant has attractive dark green leaves, often with a lighter or silvery underside, giving it a clean, refined appearance in the landscape. When it flowers, the blossoms have thick white to pale pink petals surrounding a striking center filled with red stamens. And here's the interesting part. The flower petals themselves are edible. They can have a mildly sweet flavor and can be eaten fresh, as long as you know the plant hasn't been treated with chemicals that aren't appropriate for food crops. Later, the plant can also produce fruit. Feijoa fruit has green skin and aromatic flesh with a distinctive flavor that is often described as having tropical notes. The plant is best suited to mild or warm climates, although successful fruit production still depends on the variety and local conditions. Some cultivars are more self-fertile than others, while growing compatible plants near one another can sometimes improve fruit set. If you're using pineapple guava as a hedge or ornamental shrub, avoid constantly shearing it into a perfect shape if fruit is important to you. Heavy pruning can remove flowering growth and reduce the harvest. In the right climate, this is one of those rare plants where you really don't have to choose between ornamental and edible. It can be both. Number 2. Nasturtium. Nasturtium could easily be sold purely as an ornamental flower. It has distinctive round leaves and large flowers in shades of yellow, orange, red, and sometimes combinations of several colors. Depending on the variety, plants may stay relatively compact or trail and spill over containers, raised beds, and garden edges. But both the flowers and the leaves are edible. They have a slightly peppery flavor, somewhat reminiscent of watercress or mild mustard, which makes them useful in salads, garnishes, and dishes that benefit from a fresh, spicy note. Even the young seed pods can be harvested and pickled as a caper-style substitute. Nasturtiums usually don't need rich soil. In fact, feeding them too heavily with nitrogen can produce a lot of leaves at the expense of flowers. In regions with very hot summers, the plants may decline during the hottest part of the season. In cooler climates, they can stay attractive and flower for much longer. And there's one important rule with any edible flower. Only eat plants when you know exactly where they came from and how they were grown. Don't take flowers from an ornamental planting that may have been treated with pesticides or other chemicals not intended for edible crops just because the species itself is technically edible. Nasturtium works on both sides of the equation. It is attractive enough to grow purely for the flowers, but useful enough to harvest regularly. Number 1. Scarlet runner bean. If you saw a trellis completely covered in the bright red flowers of scarlet runner beans, you could easily assume it was planted only for decoration. The vines grow vigorously and can cover a trellis, fence, arbor, or tall support. During the season, they produce clusters of brilliant red flowers against deep green foliage. Some varieties also have bicolored flowers or other color variations. But behind all those flowers is a real food crop. The young pods can be harvested and cooked while they're still tender. If you allow the pods to mature, the beans inside can also be harvested and eaten after proper cooking. The flowers themselves are considered edible as well, although if you're growing the plant mainly for beans, removing too many flowers will obviously reduce the number of pods that can develop. Scarlet runner beans generally prefer somewhat cooler growing conditions than many other warm season beans and may struggle to set pods during periods of extreme heat, so local climate still matters. The plant can also behave as a perennial in sufficiently warm regions, although in colder parts of the country it is commonly grown as an annual. Give it a tall, sturdy support from the beginning. The vines can become much more vigorous than the tiny seedlings suggest. If you want a trellis that looks like it belongs in a flower garden but still produces food, scarlet runner bean is one of the clearest examples you can grow. Instead of hiding the vegetable garden behind the house, this is the kind of crop that can become one of the most attractive features in the landscape. These 10 plants don't all belong in the same type of garden space. Some work best on trellises. Some need a permanent place in the landscape. And large plants like globe artichoke and cardoon need enough room to reach their full size. If you want to try this approach in your own yard, there are 3 practical things to check first. The first is climate. Pomegranate, pineapple guava, serviceberry, and maypop do not perform the same way in every part of the United States. The second is which part of the plant is actually edible. With cardoon, it's the leaf stalks. With globe artichoke, it's the unopened flower bud. With Jerusalem artichoke, the harvest is underground. Don't assume every part of an edible plant is used the same way. And finally, if you plan to eat flowers or leaves from a plant that is also commonly sold as an ornamental, make sure it hasn't been treated with pesticides or other chemicals that aren't intended for food crops. If you're already growing an edible plant that visitors often mistake for an ornamental, tell us what it is and what part of the country you're growing in. Subscribe for more practical ideas for growing food in real backyards, including spaces where you still want the garden to look attractive and intentional. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next garden.